Good afternoon. This is a little bit offset because our Vice Chancellor has to move on, so he took the session. So this is on the beyond E20 pathways, trade-offs and the challenges that what it is going to be faced. So ethanol is a very interesting composition, and also at a user level, everybody is interested because the vehicle started behaving differently, and then you started seeing there is a little bit of decline in the performance, or what we call it as mileage. So I'll just briefly talk about how the transition to ethanol will what it means to the engines and what it means to the users. And then from E20 to E30 or beyond, when we go ahead, what are the challenges that are going to be there? So myself, I'm Dr. Gurunadh, working as Senior Associate Professor at UPES. So next slide. So as you know, briefly, the feedstocks, you talk about sugarcane, corn, and so on, cellulose. So currently in the country, we are ahead of the target because initially we started with E10, and now we progressed into E20, 2 years ahead of targets. So now the automakers are working towards making the companies, the engines and also materials compatible to E30. So there are two challenges that comes with ethanol blending, because from the ages, automakers are mostly developing engines which are run on gasoline. So now, since the ethanol has come in a different composition and the blending has given a challenges. There are a couple of challenges that has to be looked at. One is combustion challenges, second one is the material challenges, because ethanol, by and large, in larger perspective, it will start corroding the materials, especially fuel systems, injection systems, and so on. So, next slide. So just to look at why ethanol is interesting to India, because the biofuels pathways are going towards 1G, 2G, and we are talking about hydrogen and then progressing towards 4G. So somewhere making clean efforts to transportation, because transportation sector generally accounts for larger emissions. So the transition of biofuels getting into the main line of our energy needs, transportation sector actually compensates a large amount of business opportunities or transition opportunities. But one of the challenge that we talk about when it comes to ethanol is that most of the ethanol is currently produced from the sugarcane. But sugarcane is a extremely or high water intensive yield. So for example, some statistics when I summarized, 3,000 liters of water produces 1 liter of ethanol, which is, if it is a low yield, you can look at 221 or 2,211 liters, or 6,631 is the highest. So we have to just look at the balance between our food security and energy. Both we have to balance. The Brazil has a story, and there are a lot of case studies you look at when a lot of countries have aggressively went into this model. They've seen their difficulties when it comes to the food. So I think there is an opportunity to also do a balance here. Maize plays an important role here. Maize is a moderately required lowest water consumption crop. Even though we get lesser output, but then given the numbers, when we look at these numbers and match it, so the rice and maize gives a very competitive advantage when it comes to food security and water utilization as a whole. So if we see the ethanol blending in the world, so we are at E20 currently, so which is much ahead of our targets. So E30 is the upcoming target that we all have to look at. So given these numbers, if you see Brazil and US and all, they're all at E20. There are different blends like E15, E20, E25 and so on. But in Europe, there are something called flex fuel vehicles. In flex fuel vehicles can actually take up E85 and so on. So flex fuel vehicles means we have to modify a lot of injection systems and so on, and also materials that we have to protect especially the fuel and also engine point of view. So, and then there are some flame related challenges like flame stability and knocking characteristics and all. I'll just talk about briefly. So there is a lot of value chain that the India is looking for. So we have got our own testing standards, E21, E27 and so on. So the interesting fact is that the auto industry has a different way of looking at things. When we see any technology in auto industry, when we buy as an end user a car or a vehicle, so 15 to 20 years is a life cycle span that we'll see. So for all the vehicles on the road to convert into EV or maybe hydrogen, it will take a lot of time. But ethanol gives an immediate transition here because any user who is compatible from E20 point of view, so they can start contributing in terms of greener fuels. So that is the trade-off that we have in terms of fuel flex. So ICEs are integrated blending, and in fuel flex what we have to look at is higher blending characteristics if at all the supply chain supports and it gives a very good economic numbers, then the fuel flex model will give the better benefits. As I said, the combustion challenges, so there are many interesting combustion challenges that we have to tackle, like knocking and so on. In the interest of time, I'll move on and I'll talk about it. Next slide, please.
Excellent.
So the higher, one of the important point, even when we look at the literature also, the higher ethanol blending requires a systematic engine redesign. That is the flex fuel engine that we have to get in. So in the flex fuel engine, what is important is we have to upgrade our fuel injection systems, and then injector bodies also we have to remodify, and new polymer systems we have to get in here, and also to avoid the contamination or maybe corrosion and so on. So we have to add ethanol contact sensors. So that will help us integrating this into the blends. So the shift towards the E30 gives a wonderful opportunity. Carbon content reduces, but oxygen content increases. So then the volumetric energy reduces by adding this. Next slide. So this is the thermodynamic tug of war. So in the policies, when I looked at for different countries, what they generally look at is there is a 2.5% of offset pricing that they are paying back to the users because there is 8 to 10% of drop in efficiency from the thermodynamic tug of war. So there are two scenarios. One scenario is going with the current blending 20% and sticking it. If we are going at higher blending, then there will be challenges with the efficiency. So if the challenges with the efficiency, then the offsetting policy has to be introduced by the country to gain the user confidence and then adaptability. So in the combustion side, there will be ignition challenges that can be tackled by redesigning the injectors or reintroducing the injectors into it, flame development phase and rapid burning. So these are the environmental outputs when carbon breakdown is concerned. So I'll not just talk more on this. So this is more interesting because 10% of fleet shifting to E30 removes 34 megatons of CO2 annually, which means sugarcane or maize, when you take it, the emission reduction is 65 and 50% respectively. So what I mean, these numbers in a common man terminology, 34 megatons CO2 if we remove, it is equivalent to 30 crore trees that we plant and to reduce the CO2 or greenhouse emission effects. So these are some of the interesting things. So our team is working on specifically some policy-driven problem, which is driving sustainable development in Uttarakhand, social economic impact of ethanol blending policy. So this funding we submitted recently. So we look forward in different forums similar to this to present our forward studies and so on. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Very nice.